In today's video, I'm going to talk about not only how to survive a big change or a loss in your life, but actually how to thrive. I'm Greg Taylor, and this is my channel, Make Life Better, where I share tips, tools, and strategies for helping you live your best life. So, what I want to ask you is, how are you doing? We're at the end of 2020, moving into the year of 2021, and it's been quite the year. I mean, we've had this pandemic with COVID going on in the world, and it's been the big thing, the big news for everybody, not only in the media, not only in healthcare, but also in each of our individual lives. It was like one major freight train that just hit us as a society and really had a huge impact on each person individually. And so we may have faced losses. We may have faced loss of job, whether temporary or permanent. We may have faced losses in our ability to see family. And in worst case scenarios, of course, some people have had the devastating loss of a loved one. In today's video, I want to talk about how we can thrive through change. And it may sound flippant, and in particular may not apply to the loss of a loved one in the same way at this time. But for the other changes that are going on, changes that have affected our businesses or our life, and also it's not just about COVID this year. Everybody's life carries on, and we go through the usual changes that can happen to anybody, whether that be a job change with or without COVID, relationship changes, moving to a new city, moving to a new place, and of course with COVID having some of those extra restrictions on us. And so what happens when we're in that state? Quite often when a change happens, we can feel like our life has been thrown off track, that suddenly, kind of like the idea that the projector in the movie theater is broken down and what we thought was supposed to be happening in our lives is no longer happening. The future we thought we had rolling along, that we were moving towards, suddenly isn't the same, or we can't quite see it as clearly because of a change that's happened to us. And so what I'd like to propose to you today is that part of our ability to go through change and to see how we do through that change is really a lot about our mindset and our outlook. And so I'd like to share with you today a number of factors that are key to thriving through change, not just surviving through change. And so I'm going to talk about mindset. I'm going to talk about resilience. I'm going to talk about the 4 different responses to change, or response styles that we can have, which is the best. And then also talk about something that few people know about, which is not just post-traumatic stress, but also post-traumatic growth. And so I'll present that idea to you. And so stick through to the end of the video for more on that. So I'm going to share some slides with you today just to give you some graphics and visuals for what I'm sharing about as we go through this session. So really, as I mentioned, that thriving through change, not just surviving, is really about our mindset. And it's about resetting our framework. It's resetting our expectations and rebuilding a vision for our future. When you think about change happening, change could be a change by choice or through a sudden loss or unexpected. There's really 2 layers to it, and often there's 2 words used, change and transition. Well, those are 2 very different things. So as you can see in the slide, change is events or situations or outcomes, and it can be relatively quick. So it's what you this graphic shows the water line of an ocean or a lake. And so above the water is what we can see. And that's the events, the situations, the loss that's happened. Underneath the water, however, is something more profound and deep, and that's the transition that we go through. And so transitions are about our experience of the change, the psychological aspects of the change, the process that we go through, and it's gradual and slow. So if you move to a new city, you pack up your house, you get in the truck, you move to your new place, the change happens in a weekend. But the process of actually dealing with the transition, our own psychological, emotional processing of that change, takes much longer. And so I'd like you to think about the changes that you've been through, the change event that happened, but then think about also how long the impact of that change may have rolled along. And there may be changes you've experienced that you're still in that transition zone, in that transition experience of what's happening next. And so when we're going through change, it's a longer term process. And so resilience is key to surviving that longer term change process. And so there are some key resilience factors that help us in a crisis. And I love this image that I've put up here on the screen of that tree in the field and that wind blowing. And you can tell that just by the shape of the tree and the branches, that this tree has been under sustained winds. And so that's how I feel many of us are in this particular time. We're not only facing the changes in our life that happen normal day to day, but we've also been under 8-9 months of the effects of the pandemic and all of the stress that it's causing in terms of our family, our children, our relationships, our work. And so we're under these sustained winds. And so it takes deep roots of this resilience to help us make it through and get through to the other side, to sustain these winds until the winds let up. And so one of the key aspects of resilience, one of the key factors for success in resilience is the idea of internal locus of control. And what that just means is that people who do the worst in stressful situations in life and going through changes in life are people who feel like they absolutely have no control over themselves and choices or their situation. And typically in any situation, while we may not have overarching control, like a pandemic or economic downturns that happen around us in the economy and the society around us, there are aspects of that change, of that impact that we do have control over. And so in this next slide, I have this graphic that shows these concentric circles, and on the outside, it's the circle of concern. The middle zone is in the circle of influence. And then in the middle is yourself and that circle of control. Some people would say that having any sense of control in this life is a futile attempt. But what I mean by that is by control, meaning things that we have influence over, that things that we can make choices, our own choices about. So if you think about the pandemic, for example, that's in the sphere of concern, how it's affecting society around us. Or it may be a law that changes. Or it may be something that's happening in our extended family, or it may be happening something within the organization we work in. So it's impacting us potential. It has potential to impact us, but it's in our sphere of concern. I'm concerned about it. I'm mindful of it. Within that then is the sphere of influence. So although I may be concerned about this, what do I actually have influence over? And so those are things where I may sign a petition, right? Or I may give feedback to my employer, or in my family or relationship, I may be able to call up members of family that are having an impact and may be able to talk things through with them, to have that sense of influence over the situation. I can't control them. I may not be able to control decisions made by politicians or health officials or my employer at the end of the day, but I may have some influence. But then the inner circle is that idea of this locus of control and that sense of control that we may have, or sense of choice. And so this is where we can actually make some choices. So if there are changes going on in our organization, we can take a look at those changes and think about how they may affect me. And I can make personal choices about what I do with that. If an organization's going in a complete different direction than I feel I can support, or perhaps even break my values, I can make that choice. If I don't have control over it, I may be concerned, but have even no influence. I can make personal choices based on my own values. And that may be how I show up at work, the nature of the work that I do, or it may be me choosing whether to continue to work there or whether I start to make new choices. It can be the same with family relationships. It can be the same with COVID. That I have this sphere of concern about it. I may have influence about how others react, social distance, wear masks and all, but I have also my own sense of internal control that says, where do I choose to go? And what makes me feel safe and unsafe? I can wear a mask. And so all of these things that we do have this piece of control over. And so when you think about major changes you've been through in the past or are even going through right now, you could think about that to say, my stress may be because I'm watching the news all day and I'm finding out all these things I can't control and feeling helpless about it. But what can I bring in to say, what could I influence and what could I do about that? But also to give my sense the clearest sense of security is then where are the areas where I have sense of control? What can I choose to do or not do? Two other key factors beyond that are really important when we're building our resilience and surviving through change and thriving through change are, one, strong problem-solving skills, and that's our ability to figure out options, right? It's being able to calmly and rationally look at the problem and envision a successful solution. And so that is being able to really think things through. And as I've talked about in other videos, when we're in fear mode, we have the fear response of fight, flight, or freeze. In other words, these are physical reactive responses. And what happens is they're physical. So we freeze because we're panicking, or we run because we feel like we're in danger, or we fight because we're angry and feeling trapped. Well, often that comes with that is a shutdown of our prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that's creative and can think up solutions. So again, after kind of calming ourselves down, thinking about what can I control, the next piece is getting creative to say, how can I bring about some solutions? How do I solve some problems that are facing me during this major transition? The second one is being able to ask for resources, to being able to ask for and access help. And so this is allowing for vulnerability. I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't ask for help because I feel like maybe I should know the answer myself already. I should be able to do this on my own. I'm kind of wondering what other people will think of me if I can't figure it out for myself. Well, I've learned a long time ago that my greatest strength comes when I'm being vulnerable. That when I'm able to kind of reach out for help, nobody judges me. People are actually glad to help. And so I encourage you, as you think about changes you're going through and thriving versus just surviving, one of the key strategies is going to be able to ask for help, be vulnerable, be curious, and or just get other people's ideas and opinions. Help doesn't mean them solving your problem, but it may be just listening to you as you talk it out, or maybe just be giving you some ideas or another fresh perspective. So resilience allows us to respond, right? So all of these skills I've been talking about so far, and this mindset and being able to thrive through change, is this kind of sense of locus of control, this idea about problem solving, this idea about asking for help. These are all strengths that then allow us to respond to the situation we're in. Many people that I've worked with as a coach and a counselor over these many years have been stuck in life, stuck in their emotions, really shut down because they weren't able to grasp on to those few concepts that we've been covering in terms of locus of control, asking for help, and creative brainstorming. And so resilience allows us to respond, but how are we going to respond? And so there's 4 different styles of responding that we can take on, 4 different response styles. The first one is plain old inactive. And this is where we withdraw from the change. We pull back. Maybe we've kind of earned this kind of learned helplessness, this idea like, this is too much for me. I don't know how to solve this problem. And maybe a mistaken belief that responding won't make a difference anyway, because how's it going to make an impact? Or it may be just giving up trying altogether. And this can happen to people who are feeling depressed or feeling alone or isolated. So this is responding inactively. The second of the 4 ways of responding to change is reactive. And so that's a step better. We're reacting, but it involves reacting to the change that arises externally, but there's no choice involved. It's more of a spontaneous reaction, maybe without a lot of creative thinking or problem solving happening amongst it. But we're merely reacting to change, and it's fear-based. Usually it's out of our fear that we then react. And so that may be more of the fight, flight, or freeze. And we miss the big picture or lack a strategy, and it may be us ending up on the rebound, reacting against this person, but ending up with the same person again, reacting against this employer or job, but quickly looking for a new one and ending up in the exact same situation. That's when we're being reactive. It's when things don't really change for the better. The third type of response to change is proactive. And this is usually the one that we hear about, being proactive in what we choose to do or being proactive in change. And so this involves choosing our response to change. So we make informed choices. This is using some of those resilience skills in being able to get creative, get out of that fear, fight, flight, freeze response and being able to think about and come up with ideas and then act in terms of those decisions. And it can choose to constructively respond to change and effectively incorporate it into our lives. So we're getting a little more proactive. A change is coming and we're actually able to proactively respond to it because we've had our eyes on the horizon and we could see that it's about to impact us. But I'd like to propose the fourth one as the best solution. In these responses to change, the best one is becoming, how about this, a self-directed initiator. And so for a self-directed initiator, they're not only responding to change, but they also not only manage change, but they also embrace and even initiate change. And so self-directed initiators actually view change as an opportunity. And it allows us to influence and actively shape the course of our lives because we're actively engaged. So instead of my life being a series of reactions to impacts and changes that are coming at me from the people and the world and the work around me, as a self-directed initiator, I actually initiate change, not only responding to the ones that come at me, but also choosing to get out of my comfort zone and to actually make active change. And so this is how we shape the course of our lives while also effectively managing those changes that come at us. And so it can take some practice, it takes some courage, and it takes those other resilience skills of being able to ask for help and get advice and get creative. But it is the best way to move forward. And so when we think about all of the changes we talked about earlier, whether it's a job change, a relationship change, impacts of COVID and the pandemic, how can we start to think like a self-directed initiator? I don't know about you, but over these 8 months, I started by just rallying around to get to the to solve problems that came with the pandemic. I've been fortunate to be able to maintain my work at a distance and remotely and online. But at the same time, I also manage teams in an organization, and we had to move everybody remote and change all our policies. And so the first few months were just full blast work trying to manage the change in a very reactive, in a sense, way. Eventually, we started to get a little bit more proactive in the change to say, okay, how else can we start to take advantage of the situation, or at least take advantage of technology and other options to be able to do the best job possible in this current situation. But then it's been hard since then, right? That adrenaline has started to wear out. That initial change that we all jumped on top of it and kind of pulled things together. Or maybe you have kids at home and you have to rally around the troops and figure out a way to get them to school and manage at home and balance work and life. But now as we've ended towards the end of the year, a lot of people are getting tired and feeling a bit discouraged. And I want to give you an encouragement with this next chart. And this is looking at our performance and our energy on the left-hand side. That arrow up and down on the left is that performance and energy that we have in our life, or that clarity or our ability to be self-directed initiators. And then along the axis, along the horizon, or the horizontal axis, is time. So as we go through time, and as you look at this chart, what you'll see is us kind of going along life. Kind of our performance on that yellow zone there is kind of going up and down, but we're in our normal zone, right? Before the pandemic hit, for example, we were just all cruising along thinking it's life as normal. But then this forum element or this event hits us. And in the big case of this last year was COVID. And so suddenly we hit resistance. In other words, kind of a denial that it's all happening. And I don't know about you, I was even on a business trip in the last few days before they shut down the airports, and I just made it home. And that was a little bit of me, and this pandemic word is being floated around. There's going to be changes, but how bad could it really be? That denial that says, how bad could this really get? And so then the change event happens. We resisted a bit, but then we hit into chaos. And that's where that line drops off, and our performance, our energy, our sense of ourself our ability to make choices and proactive, let alone self-directed choices, is really at a low. And you can see that chaos zone. And a lot of us have felt in that chaos zone for the last few months. And so eventually we come to a transforming idea. And that's what I hope this video can be for you today. The transforming idea that says, if we are in this situation and wallowing in the news and feeling hopeless about the situation isn't working for me, then how do I shift my mindset and move from inactive and maybe had moved through reactive, and maybe I've started into the proactive phase, but could I actually become a self-directed initiator in the situation? In other words, with my circumstances, how do I use these circumstances to my advantage? What can I be learning during this time? What can I be creating during this time? What have I learned during this time that can change how I've been going about my life, whether it's managing my household or where I live or the work that I do or the relationships that I'm in, or even how I treat myself in terms of my health, my mindfulness. And maybe it gives me a new opportunity to start to think about new ways to live and new ways to act. And so on this slide, you'll see this transforming idea where as we go through time, we realize I've got to get going on this. How can I recover? And so you can see that zone where our performance is still up and down, but it starts to move up the graph, and our performance, our energy, our attitude, our outlook begins to lift. And you can see that over time it starts to lift. And what you'll notice on this graph, and this is where the hope comes from, that I hope can pick you up for the next few months to get you going, is that that productivity, performance, and energy actually goes past the line where we were when we started before all of this. That you can actually use situations like this. And that's the example or the wording I used earlier, which was people all know about post-traumatic, those traumatic events, the post-traumatic events that happen to us. And that post-traumatic stress that is the result of those traumatic experiences. And so we usually think of trauma and traumatic events and traumatic change leading to stress that injures us or that lingers over time. Well, research has also shown that with resources and help to deal with the stresses through trauma and through change, people can actually experience what they call post-traumatic growth. And that's where, because of the challenge, people have had to rethink themselves, learn new skills, gain new strengths, and gain a new vision for their life. And in doing that process, instead of being stuck in the pre-crisis status quo, where we were maybe comfortable, but also maybe a little bit laissez-faire, a little bit maybe relaxed on what we're actually doing and where we're actually going, these kinds of big turmoil circumstances actually make us face our lives, face our values, face our choices, and say, what do I do next? So through this challenge, and like the slide shows, going up through that transforming idea, through into integrating these new visions and ideas, becoming a self-directed initiator, we can end up in a new status quo that is above where we were before the crisis happened. And so that's my hope for you, is that if you think about now the changes that you've been through, but maybe haven't made it through the transition to the future, or maybe you're facing major life crisis or challenges right now, it's not to minimize the sorrow or the change or the loss or the grief or the angst or the fear that you may be going through. But it's to say those are natural responses. And as you're able to work those through, gain some support, treat yourself with some tender, loving care, then you would be able to start to envision a new future, to think about, how do I take control over the things that I can? How do I re-envision where I want to be? And how do I move to the next point in my life? And how do I reach that new status quo that is above the one I was at before all this happened in the first place? And so I love this image. It's all about perspective, isn't it? It's that perspective, like this lens or this ball, looking through it and how it magnifies the future. And so with this new mindset, thinking about yourself as a self-directed initiator, being able to think about the difference between change and transition, to be able to think about how to build your resilience in thinking about your locus and that center of control, and being able to get creative and have decision-making strengths, and being able to ask for help. And finally, that outlook that says through trauma and change and major events, I can actually end up ahead, re-energized and re-envisioned for moving into the future. And so this new mindset leads to a new perspective on life. And so I hope this video has been helpful to you. I know we're all going through challenging times these days, not just with the pandemic, but life rolls on, as I said. And so you may be facing all kinds of changes, but wouldn't it be better to feel in control of some of where your life went? And so I encourage you to think about these things, and check out the links below for some of the handouts and slides that I've presented here today. You'll be able to download those. And of course, if you've gained anything out of today's video, be sure to click like. And if you want to hear more tips, tools, and strategies for getting the most out of your life here on my channel, then be sure to subscribe.